Athens, the world's first democracy, the most glorious city in the ancient world. A city of wealth and power, the center of a mighty naval empire. At the head of this state stood one man, a man who seemed to embody all the Athenians' achievements, Pericles. But Pericles would now risk everything he and the Athenians had built in one great gamble. A war that he hoped would make Athens the undisputed ruler of the Mediterranean. This conflict would indeed transform Athens, but in a way Pericles could never have imagined. This tiny state had built a naval empire that stretched across the Aegean. Her mighty fleet of trireme warships was the most powerful of the day. Athens lay at the center of a great trading network that dealt in goods from as far afield as Britain in the west and India in the east, bringing untold wealth into the city. Pericles took the podium and presented the Athenians with a bold new plan. A proposal that would offer Athens her final crowning glory. Pericles intended to vanquish Athens' last great rival, the city-state of Sparta. Sparta was the only other Greek state that matched Athens' power. The Spartans ruled all of southern Greece, and they were a fearsome military force. Their citizens were trained from birth in the arts of war. The assembly embraced Pericles' plan. The Athenians were never once to shrink from a fight. But Pericles knew that any war with Sparta would not be easy to win, for the Spartan infantry were far superior to Athens' forces. Athens' strength lay in her navy. So Pericles proposed a strategy of astonishing complexity and sophistication. He convinced the Athenians to abandon all the land around Athens and retreat behind the great long walls that stretched down from the city to its harbor at Piraeus. Pericles would supply the city by sea. Merchantmen would bring in grain, wheat and other essential supplies from Athens' colonies and allies across the Mediterranean. Protected by the mighty Athenian fleet. And Pericles would use this great navy to attack the Spartans from the coast. It was a strategy based on a set of finely judged assumptions.
Pericles' expectation was that after a year or two, but no more than 3, the Spartans would realize that they could not win the war because the Athenians would never give them the infantry battle they needed in order to win, and they had no other device available.
Pericles was sure that this fleet could now bring Athens her greatest triumph. The Athenians crowded behind the city walls. Confident in their vision of imperial power and glory, they assumed that Pericles' strategy could only bring them. The Spartans invaded Athenian territory and set about burning all the farmland around the city. The Athenians became increasingly anxious. They could only watch from the city walls as their fields and crops were destroyed. But such was Pericles' reputation, he managed to convince the Athenians to stick with his plan. The city could rely on her fleet and shipments from overseas to survive. Little did Pericles know that this fleet now carried an even greater threat. One year into the war, the grain boats that fed the city brought with them an additional cargo: plague. A disease that would now devastate Athens.
Pericles' plan couldn't anticipate difficulties that we now would suggest were rather likely in those circumstances of crowding. And the results were horrendous.
With the population crammed behind the city walls, the affliction spread like wildfire. The symptoms were horrific. The Athenian historian Thucydides, who lived through these years, recorded its effects.
The body was suddenly seized, first with violent heats around the head and redness and inflammation of the eyes, and then the disease descended into the bowels, producing violent ulceration and uncontrollable diarrhea. The sufferings of individuals seemed almost beyond the capacity of human nature.
The city must have looked terrible, smelled terrible, been awful to be in, and terror must have reigned everywhere.
Sufferers, racked with fever and overcome with unquenchable thirst, would crawl into the city cisterns and water mains to die. Thucydides witnessed the scene in Athens streets.
The bodies of dying men lay one upon another, and half-dead creatures reeled about the streets. The catastrophe became so overwhelming that men cared nothing for any rule of religion or law.
The plague's effects on Athens were absolutely devastating. The whole fabric of Athenian society broke down. Morally, people saw no point in being good. Why be good if the good and the evil die just as easily?
The plague would kill over a third of Athens' population. And then it struck the city's figurehead, Pericles. Plutarch, Pericles' biographer, described his symptoms.
The plague seized Pericles, not with sharp and violent fits, but with a dull and lingering distemper, wasting the strength of his body and undermining his noble soul.
By the end, the patrician hero of the city was reduced to relying on potions and magic in an attempt to cure itself.
He showed one of his friends a charm that a woman had hung around his neck, as if to say that he was very sick indeed when he would admit of such foolery as this.
Finally, after 6 months of lingering illness, Pericles died in 429 BC.